die, to be really dead. That must be glorious.
Why, Count Dracula.
There are far worse things waiting man than death.
Dracula is a supernatural horror film released by Universal Pictures on February 14th, 1931. Based on the Hamilton Dean and John L. Balderston 1924 play adaptation of Bram Stoker's novel of the same name, the film was written by Garrett Fort. The film was directed by Todd Browning and Carl Frond, and stars Bela Lugosi, Helen Chandler, David Manners, Edward Van Sloan, and Dwight Fire. You'd be hard-pressed to name a more iconic ghoul of horror culture than Count Dracula, the infamous blood-sucking caped gentleman of the night. Whether you envelop yourself in every horror novel you can get your hands on, or have happened upon a vampire movie or TV show in your life, or even just stepped foot into a bargain bin costume store, the bulk of the population will recognize the name of Dracula without even thinking about it. Much of the seemingly unreal fame can be attributed to 1931's Dracula, with Bela Lugosi's portrayal of the Wicked Count being the permanent benchmark by which all Draculas are compared. The movie was also the first of many horror movies produced by Universal at the time, setting the stage for them to become a juggernaut of not just horror movies, but the entire industry itself. But like many of its contemporaries that pioneered the horror genre, Dracula has been left in the dust of the past, courtesy of how many countless adaptations followed in its footsteps. So seeing as it became such an icon of the human psyche, how did this film do it? What makes this movie horror royalty? In this review, we're sinking our teeth into one of the meatiest contributions to cinema, and seeing what taste we get for the life force it provides. Just as a warning to those of you who haven't seen this movie yet, there are major spoilers ahead. If you wish to see this movie for yourself, without having anything spoiled for you, please click off the video now. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. The story begins with the arrival of a man in a mountain town. The man apparently has an important meeting with Count Dracula, a name that strikes fear into the locals. Though implored not to go, the man proceeds to the castle of Dracula, making it there in a horse-drawn carriage despite the driver disappearing. The man, known as Renfield, meets with Dracula, providing him a lease and papers for him to travel to England. After Dracula retires for the night, Renfield begins to explore the castle, only to faint at the sight of a bat flying outside. With the help of a now hypnotized and subservient Renfield, Dracula crosses the sea, arriving to England after feasting on the crew of the ship that brought him. Upon arriving in London, he makes the acquaintance of Dr. Seward, the man who owns the asylum next to Carfax Abbey, the estate Dracula purchased. He also meets the doctor's daughter Mina, her fiancé Jonathan Harker, and Lucy Western. After being left alone for the night, Dracula enters the room of Lucy, draining her blood and killing her. After this happens, Professor Van Helsing, who studies both Lucy's corpse and the blood of Renfield, who has been committed to Dr. Seward's asylum, concludes they are dealing with a vampire. After being questioned by Van Helsing, Renfield states that if he is not released, Dr. Seward will have to answer for what happens to his daughter Mina. Dracula arrives in Mina's chambers that same night. Mina speaks the next morning of a terrible dream with mist in her room and a pale white face emerging from the mist to touch her on the face. Van Helsing examines her, revealing 2 marks on her neck. Before they can go further, though, Dracula arrives. He attempts to court Mina, but Mina is sent away, and Dracula leaves after Van Helsing reveals a mirror to him, showing that he has no reflection. As Van Helsing explains to Jonathan and Dr. Seward how Dracula is a vampire, Mina is drawn outside by Dracula, who embraces her before walking away. Renfield arrives, interrupting the three men in their discussion about Dracula, urging them to save Mina. He is cut off by the arrival of a bat, and the screams of a maid who found Mina in the courtyard unconscious, causing the three men to rush out to rescue her. In the following days, London is plagued by the appearance of a woman in white, taking and feeding on the blood of small children. After Van Helsing questions Mina, she reveals that the woman is Lucy, back from the dead. Mina is locked in her room that night, with wolfsbane surrounding her for protection. Though Jonathan protests, Van Helsing and Dr. Seward convince him that it is not safe for her to leave. Van Helsing explains that the only way to save Mina from the horrors she faces is to find the lair of Dracula and drive a stake through his heart. Dracula arrives in the house, getting Van Helsing alone in the room with him. After confessing he fused his blood with Mina's, Dracula attempts to hypnotize Van Helsing, but his will is too strong. Van Helsing drives him away with a crucifix. Dracula returns, taking Mina to his abode in Carfax Abbey, while Renfield, Van Helsing, and Jonathan also converge on the estate. Dracula kills Renfield, seeing that he led Van Helsing and Jonathan to him. Van Helsing and Jonathan pursue Dracula as he takes Mina down into the bowels of the estate. In the final moments of the movie, Van Helsing and Jonathan find the place Dracula sleeps, driving a stake through his heart and releasing Mina from his control. Jonathan and Mina then proceed to leave Carfax Abbey together, hand in hand. This is a movie that has a very pronounced sense of style, and it also does very well developing on the mythos of the vampire, and how it hides in plain sight in the modern world. This gives the movie an enticing edge to it over many of its contemporaries, but with that said, it still experiences some of the pitfalls of an era where popular entertainment had not yet moved from stage to screen. The sets used for this movie are quite well designed, and they really capture that grand feeling the buildings from the Victorian era have to offer. The camera work also provides a framework to really give you that sense of scale, especially looking at the grand staircase of Dracula's Transylvanian home, or the crypt below Carfax Abbey, or the opera near the beginning of the movie. The visual tricks they use, such as showing Dracula's eyes lighting up when he hypnotizes his targets, may be basic, but they are quite well executed and do a good job of getting the point across in a subtle, non-distracting way. The actors all turn in very good performances, with Bela Lugosi's suave yet sinister portrayal of the Transylvanian menace, and Edward Van Sloan's measured yet driven take on Professor Van Helsing being quite charming and fun to watch in the moments of screen time we share with the two of them. Though some segments are somewhat hammed up in light of the limited resources available, the actors lean into these scenes, making the hammy charm that comes with performances like Dwight Fire's Renfield much more entertaining to behold. Though the dialogue doesn't often do much beyond explain the proceedings of the film, it does have moments of profundity, in quotes like "there being worse things than death," or "the children of the night and how they sing," adding a sort of chill to the scenes that you might not expect. The story starts off quite interesting. The interaction between Renfield and Dracula leading to Renfield being converted into his servant, the ocean crossing and the massacre of the boat's crew, and Dracula's arrival and subsequent feeding upon London's inhabitants really draw you into what's happening and makes you wonder where the story's planning to go. Unfortunately, upon landing in the asylum, you learn the answer to that question is not very far. The second half of the movie rarely leaves the grounds of Seward's asylum, and though they are able to make the most of it by highlighting how the mystical can exist, even under the nose of a world that now touts modern science, It also marks the end of Bela Lugosi's screen time, with him only appearing 3 or 4 times for a few minutes at a time following this. The movie also tries to insert a subplot about Mina's friend Lucy returning from the dead, but the minute after Mina confesses to seeing Lucy's return, the movie forgets she ever existed, leaving you to wonder how or why this loose end came to exist. The camera work in this movie is relatively basic, with most scenes, especially around the second half of the movie, composed of simple side views with a couple of close-ups here and there. You can tell that this era was still grappling with the ins and outs of what they could do on film, because much of the camera shots, as well as the blocking of the scenes, is reminiscent of how someone would watch a stage play, which would have still been more widely accepted as the standard of entertainment for the time. This in and of itself does lend a more theatrical flair to how the scenes are carried out, but in saying that, there isn't much to be had in the way of variety. The pacing of the movie starts off well, but as you get closer to the end, you find yourself trapped in the same location, going over more or less the same story beats, with the exception of the occasional pop-in from the Count. While for the most part this isn't necessarily a bad thing, it does raise a few questions. Mainly to the effect of, if you know that Dracula has set up shop in the house across the way from the asylum, why didn't they head over there the minute they discovered his vampiric condition? They establish pretty clearly that Dracula can only sleep on his own native soil, thus why he shipped boxes of the stuff overseas. So while he's out prowling, why not take the opportunity to go mess up his crib and potentially set a trap to take down the oversized mosquito lord? The movie spends a lot of time in the second act explaining round table style what the men need to do in order to put down Dracula. But why not have them explain the story mechanics of how wolfsbane, crucifixes, and generally holy things repulsing the Count to the audience with actions? It would make more sense storytelling-wise, and it would also open up the floor to exploring more of the vampire mythos and Dracula's tale specifically. It's also hard to ignore the fact that Lucy returns from the dead to drink the blood of children, and that the movie doesn't wrap up that fact by story's end. Another thing to mention is that beyond the intro of the movie, there is no soundtrack attached to any of the scenes. Though the settings and the character interactions distract from this fact pretty effectively, it's still a worthwhile thing to mention, as soundtrack has a way of developing the atmosphere of a movie, and also because many movies at the time were making use of one in some form or fashion. Lastly, we must end with the end. The end of the movie, much like many films of the period, is one that cuts off perhaps a little too soon. Though the end scene of Jonathan and Mina walking up the spiral staircase hand in hand as church bells toll is a very well shot scene, and one that works well enough within the context of the movie, it still comes as a bit of a hard landing, as they had only just killed the Count a couple minutes ago, and Van Helsing stayed behind to take care of something that seemed kind of urgent. But given how much went into a relatively short period of time, it's still more or less at home with what this movie had to show. The final rating for this beast that is black and white and red all over is 7 out of 10. Though its play-like structure and filming techniques are certainly antiquated by today's standards, the film still has plenty of charm to spare, courtesy of bubbly performances, an innate science versus mystical curiosity, and grand sets that really sell the scenes. Though it won't come as much of a fright, it is still certainly an entertaining and engaging offer, and an important mark of the vampire in filmmaking history. Far more so, anyway, than some more recent cinematic offerings that for the sake of our collective dignity we will not talk about. If its main actor can act like they never existed, so can you.
And that will be it for today. Thank you all for stopping by. If for whatever reason you enjoyed what you saw today, consider sticking around, maybe leaving a like or subscribing if you wish. And if you have any recommendations for movies you want to see reviewed in the future, be sure to drop those down in the comments. There's plenty more to come, so if that's something you care about, I'll see you when I see you.